I'm gonna share. Almost. All right. Well, thank you all so much. It's great to see a crowd here tonight for Brain Club. Since I don't know everyone, I'll introduce myself. I'm Mel Hauser. I use she, they pronouns, and I'm executive director here at All Brains Belong Vermont. And welcome to Brain Club. Brain Club is, if this is your first time at Brain Club, we do this every week, everyday brain life topics in a variety of formats. And so tonight's format is going to be a community panel. I'll give a little bit of an intro, and then I'll introduce our panelists. Just by way of ground rules, setting the stage for safety, all forms of participation are okay here. So you can have your video on or off. You can move around, fidget, snack, do all the things, and everyone is welcome. So it is a common Brain Club occurrence to have all kinds of pets, stuffies, kids climbing all over you. And you can communicate however you want to. You can just unmute and just start talking. You can raise your hand like with your regular hand or the emoticon, or type in the chat box. As someone was asking before, side chat is a totally part of Brain Club. And we affirm all aspects of identity here, and part of respecting and protecting one another's access needs is just by way of safety. If anyone's going to talk about anything potentially distressing, please just give each other a heads up as a content warning. So I'm going to turn on captions. I honestly leave this here as a visual support to remind myself to do it. So there we go. So if it's not popping up automatically, if you'd like it to pop up, your choices are to either click the live transcript closed captioning button, or if that's not a choice, more ... and then I'll give you a choice for a live transcript or showing subtitles. So what we know is that we all have different brains, right? That we all sense, take in information through our sensory systems, process it, learn, think, communicate. We all do it differently, and we all have unique patterns of strengths and challenges, which is why universal design, that is flexible, multimodal formats for doing all things, is best practice. And what we know is that that's not the case in most many contexts in society, and which is why employment is really hard and really complicated. So what we've been talking about this whole month at Brain Club is that the idea is, by learning your own brain, learning about your own strengths, your own challenges, you can strive for niche construction, which is designing a life based on your own brain's needs and strengths. And so all through the month of June, we've talked about this concept. We've talked about access needs. We've talked about communicating these access needs. We've talked about supports and services that can facilitate our creating our best lives. And now tonight, we will apply this concept to employment. The concept is that by getting to know your own brain, you can then reflect on your current situation. What's working well? What's not working? What would work better? So if, for example, you have the kind of brain that is constantly thinking and talking about brains, well, you might quit your job and start a nonprofit where you get to think and talk about brains all day. That's an example of niche construction. But short of that, we are going to hear from panelists today to talk about what this process has been like in their own lives, about making your work life work for your brain. We've talked this month about the concept of the social model of disability, where rather than thinking about deficits of an individual, the issue is an inaccessible world. Disability, referring to that gap between what you are endeavoring to do and what you're able to do, is going to depend on how many barriers are in your environment. So if I am a wheelchair user and I approach a building that has a ramp, I'm going to have less disability than if I approach a building that has a ramp. And when we talk about invisible disabilities, disabilities that you can't tell just by looking, if we're not also thinking through this lens of barriers to access, we set people up for internalizing deficiency. So if I'm in a job that is not affording me access to be able to do the thing, and it is not named that it's the environment that is interfering with my ability to do the thing, perhaps I might think that brain, why can't you do the thing? And so it's all too common, right? That internalized ableism is a common everyday struggle for so many people, myself included. Barriers to access, what does this look like? So this literature of barriers to access for the healthcare system applies very readily to really all the major systems. So physical barriers to access, social and communication barriers to access, systemic discrimination and exclusion. In effect, when people get the message explicitly or implicitly that there's one right way to be a person, guess what? We're not going to feel, not only we're not going to be able to access our community, but we're not going to feel included. So an access need is anything that is required to meaningfully and fully participate in one's environment and community. And everyone, even people whose brains think, learn, communicate in a way that society has deemed the typical type of brain, also has access needs. And access needs can be, and 2 weeks ago, we have a whole brain club on this, but just by way of review, all kinds of access needs. And when these are not met in the workplace, we're going to have disability. And lastly, the last just like overview concept before I introduce the panel, and if you go back to on the All Brains Belong website, there's a May 1st Brain Club that's all about neuro-inclusive employment and the principles of this. Screenshot it. Oh yeah, it gets recorded. Oh, for sure, totally. So what goes into designing a neuro-inclusive workplace? And All Brains Belong, one of our community projects is a neuro-inclusive employment bright spotting program where we are, it's still open, looking for nominations from community members to nominate Vermont employers that are using concepts of inclusive design to create environments where all brains can thrive. And and then we contact them, we study them and interview them and learn from their experience. And so what we have found thus far, which it's the concepts that come out in the research too, which is that what goes into a neuro-inclusive workplace, the physical environment, including sensory processing and motor related access, communication style, the culture, having meaningful work. Those of us with dopamine bound brains where we have interest dependent learning and engagement and motor coordination and executive functioning. So meaning is a common source of dopamine. Having flexibility in choices, autonomy, and flexibility in workflows and routines. All too often, there is a default workflow, a default routine that everyone is expected to follow, because there's one right brain. No, there's not. And so if you have one default pathway and someone has the kind of brain for whom that does not come naturally, that is not neuro-inclusive. So when I do trainings for organizations trying to improve their neuro-inclusivity, we talk about like the simplest lens to view this is, are there defaults? Are there defaults in recruitment, interviewing, the whole hiring process? Are there defaults in the way that people are supervised, the way feedback's been provided, the way meetings are? Anytime there is a default, everyone else is othered. And so, which is why so many people do not feel included in their workplaces. And particularly when we think about the intersectionality of all of the different ways in which people are othered, the neurodivergent community is really set up for workplaces and work experiences being unfulfilling at best, toxic and harmful and worse for many, many people. So with that, I am going to, I'll just also say that what we don't want and what we all too often see is the idea of the square peg being hammered to fit into the round hole. And what happens? We shatter the peg. So let me stop our sharing. And actually, before I introduce our panel, I'll also just pause and take questions and comments because I just did a lot of talking.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I've only just started thinking about this since figuring out I'm autistic, and it's completely changed my understanding of why I've had so much trouble at work over my adult life. And I'm being very open with prospective employers now. I've been like, I ran back to freelance, but I'm looking at jobs and I'm being super open with them about my access needs now. I'm just sort of figuring out what they are and just telling people. And I've been kind of surprised at how receptive people are. And I'm curious, what have you seen in terms of people being open to these ideas? Am I just doing this at the right time, or am I getting lucky with, the few people that I've told, or are we in the midst of a turning tide right now?
Gosh, I hope so. I think that it's a culture, an individual workplace culture issue. So I think that often when, I'll give the example of conversations I've had with many of my patients who are not in neuro-inclusive cultures, who are not in environments where it's safe to disclose that they're autistic or ADHD or dyslexic or any other such aspects of who they are as people, where it's not safe to talk about. There are stereotypes, there are judgments, there are someone shared with me today that they even disclosed to their friends that they're autistic, and the response was, well, you don't look autistic, like as though that's a thing. Like, that's not a thing. Exactly, right? I mean, so it really, or another conversation where someone was saying, I felt really comfortable when I was on a job interview. Like, that's weird. Like, yeah, so you got to look for that. The idea is when you've never felt safe, you almost don't expect it. And so once you feel it, you're like, oh, I'm actually comfortable being my true self around a bunch of people. Like, yeah, that's how it's supposed to be. And so therefore, when you're in environments where it's not comfortable to be your true self, you leave. And that's part of niche construction. And so many people have never had that experience. So they think it's like, yeah, why I left my that's very interesting. I'd love, yeah, I'd love to connect with you about that. A lot of people leave their careers, their whole fields, because it like culturally it is not safe. And safety is physical, emotional, psychological, like all the many ways. And yeah, great question. But yeah, I do hope that and I do think the time is ripe to really be shifting the community conversation around neurodiversity. And I think it's because I really do think that neurodiversity and disability are the missing pieces of all of the social justice conversations. And so, actually, I'll also see if anyone else has questions or comments before I introduce our panel. You're welcome. Okay, well, we are joined tonight by three amazing panelists. So I'll introduce you all, and then you can decide what order in which you'd like to speak. So Tracy Rue, who uses she and they pronouns, works as an assistive technology consultant for the Vermont Assistive Technology Program. And Tracy helps folks brainstorm technology solutions to supporting individuals with disabilities at home, work, school, and in the community. And Tracy identifies as neurodivergent. We are also joined by Rebecca Olson, who uses she, her pronouns, who has worked for many years as a nonprofit communications specialist. And she also identifies as neurodivergent and is currently exploring alternative career paths better suited to her brain. And she divides her time between Vermont and a cottage by the ocean in Nova Scotia. It's great niche construction right there. Michael Shore is one of my favorite people, who is a licensed clinical social worker and a mental health therapist, specializing in supporting neurodivergent people of all ages. And Michael, what else should I say about you? I'm just winging it.
That's enough of it. I'll introduce myself more as you go along. So whatever you want to, but otherwise you could.
Amazing. Who wants to go first? You want to go first because you're unmuted already, Michael?
Oh, I'll let someone else go first. I'm gonna get some better lighting on myself.
Okay.
Too.
Excellent. Niche construction. Tracy, if you'd like to go first, that would be amazing. Otherwise, I'm going to queue up a video from Rebecca.
Okay, I can go first. That's fine. So yeah, I'm Tracy. I started my own neurodivergent journey, I guess, like probably 2 years ago. I've been in my current job as an assistive technology specialist for 7 years. And I didn't know much about neurodivergence. All I had heard was of, autism and ADHD, and they were in their own little silos, and I didn't see myself reflected in the definitions in that community, because they weren't really shown there. But I got connected with one of my clients, I think, who I was just talking with, and there was so much in common, which threw me down a rabbit hole, and I did a lot of research on it, and realized that I had a lot of internalized ableism around my own life. And here I was working in the disability community, not realizing that, I was trying slowly to solve all of my own quirks, and that's how I ended up in my job. Luckily, this job fell in my lap. It's a great job for me. I get tons of dopamine from my job. I get to solve problems on the daily, and they're short sometimes, but they're so interesting. And I love working with people in this capacity. And luckily, that's been part of my niche construction, is this job that I just kind of fell into. And I found no pushback. I mean, I work in the disability community, so obviously my supervisors are welcoming. When I say I need this, or this works better for me, or the more confidence I brought to that, the more explicit I was about the tools, the accommodations that I needed, the less pushback I got. I didn't present myself as a person with a disability and then expected someone else to solve the problem for me. I brought my accommodations to the table and said, here's what I need. And I think that for an employer, that's easy to handle. This person says they need XYZ. Okay, I don't have to think about it. And that works pretty nicely. So, but yeah, I've been working on curbing my own internalized ableism, working with my executive functioning instead of against it, because every article that you read about time management and to-do lists, they don't really work for my brain. So just turning that around and not going into the shame spiral that Mel described, where why can't you just do this, brain? Why can't you just be that way? and being like, oh, no, it's because you just need to be this way. And it's fine. It's like solved a lot of problems and a lot of relationships at work and otherwise. So that's me. Don't really know what else to say.
I'm curious, Tracy, in your professional life, do you come across lots of folks who are not achieving niche construction in their work
100%.
life?
Yeah. And I mean,
Mhm.
before I had this job, I've had lots of jobs, but when I used to have a management position, and I would find myself hiring people who now I can see were neurodivergent, and it was a horrible fit. And I would be like, you need to do something more interesting because what you're doing now is making you miserable, which is making me miserable. So you should go do something else. I'm not firing you, but you should go somewhere else. And that happens with my clients too, where they come in and their accommodation list is 900 pages long, like their dream accommodation list for this job. And I'm like, but do you want this job? Do you like this job? Like question number one. So yeah, I think with folks with dopamine bound brains, like finding something that's interesting and that you like, especially in this employment market, is ideal.
Yes. All right. I am going to queue up a video. Oops, no, don't start playing the video yet. I always say that part of my own niche construction should be that because we really do have a culture of interdependence here. Like it is totally normal and ideal to be connected with other people and rely on one another. So I have that was a brain rule I had to unlearn because of how independence is glorified. Like autonomy is essential, but independence is a brain rule. So anyway, I often talk about how like if someone else could operate all my thing, like my clickings, I would have a much more comfortable job existence. Or hold on a second.
I've definitely been changing the language in my job too around independence because that used to be a big catchword in assistive technology. But after becoming a part of the neurodivergent community, interdependence is
Interdependent.
and autonomy is what I've been altering to.
It's awesome. It's the shifting and because I think that there's so many very subtle yet profound ways that ableism creeps into everyday conversation. And so talking about how independence.
Hey.
Yeah, go
So,
ahead.
I guess I've been.
Hold on. Ah, really? Hold on. I thought that someone was talking, but it was the video. So. All right, here we go.
Hey. So, I guess I've been neurodivergent my whole life, but I didn't realize it until Melissa became my doctor last year. I will say I do think it's affected my school and work life throughout my life. In my early life, my life supported me to be really stimulated in things and creative. And I think then I was getting more of the dopamine that I needed, and so I had fewer symptoms. But then I've had situations in my life where I've had work situations where I was really depleting my dopamine in order to get the tasks done. And I think that has led to some really extreme physical crises, one of which I'm kind of dealing with the aftermath of now. So So the first one was I worked for FEMA after Hurricane Katrina for their disaster assistance hotline. And it was a 12.5-hour night shift without days off. And I got adrenal fatigue, which led to chronic fatigue syndrome from that. And it took years for that to get diagnosed. And I just thought I just wasn't someone who could handle stress well. And it really like set me back a few years. I really wasn't functioning for a few years when I had that chronic fatigue syndrome. And then most recently I worked at a nonprofit for 7 years, and the job was just pretty demanding, a lot of executive functioning and balancing all these different tense, high pressure priorities. And then I was released from that job a few weeks ago. So I'm trying to find something now that's a little more, well, actually a lot more, just a better fit for my brain. And I realized, I mean, I was able to get the job done pretty well, like the first couple of years. And then I just started having more and more physical symptoms and getting sicker and sicker. It became harder and harder to do the job. And then I think that from the employer just became like less helpful and I found out they weren't very accommodating. So I had to submit ADA paperwork for accommodations, and they were pretty simple accommodations, like just working regular work hours, starting the workday a little later, not doing video meetings because I have some visual processing issues. But basically, the overall takeaway from that experience was that working in that environment with having to be on the computer 40 hours a week and lots of spreadsheets and stress really depleted my dopamine. And then I started having a lot of physical symptoms and kind of entered a sort of downward spiral with that I'm really hoping to come out of. So I'm really curious to hear other people's experiences and ideas today, and just think of some positive way to approach having a brain that functions differently and what professional life could look like that supports that. So that's really what I'm trying to focus on right now for myself. And I'm not sure what it'll look like, but I'm really hoping it's not 40 hours a week on a computer, because I just don't think I can physically do that anymore.
Oh, that's beautiful. Right. I mean, so I think that often we have to experience what we don't want before we can even begin to think about what we're looking for. Like, oh yeah, that I never want to do that again, So and it sucks a lot of the time. But it's about reframing, like, yeah, I learned that. Michael.
Okay, I'm here. So your aim is for this to be targeted to about 5 minutes of content?
Sure.
Okay. Well, so I'll wing it. My name is Michael. As Mel introduced me before, I am a psychotherapist by profession. I am a licensed master's level social work doing clinical stuff under supervision. My current work is do largely specialize in working with people with neurodiversity, and I'm tending towards moving to focusing on adults. Partly, I think, because it's the toxicity of some of the parenting culture here I find a little bit noticeable, in terms of ableism and that kind of stuff from my point of view. So and I'm not saying that Vermont or the Northeast Kingdom has some special, amazing problem, but there are cultural trends I've noticed across different areas. And this particular one strikes me. I've had less of those issues with people from, say, Montpelier or Burlington or something, and different experiences with people in West Virginia when I was working there. But anyway, my background's pretty complicated. I grew up in a sort of unusual situation. I started my life in a private school, had academic challenges most of my life in one form or another, as well as strengths. And so I've always had unusual interests and things that I've really wanted to focus on. And as much as anything that's affected my social life, as much as like any primary sort of social differences that I've had in terms of like how I process people's emotions or my nonverbal communication or things like that, I have some differences. I think at this point with that, it's mostly expressive communication. It's not typical with me, and that can be a disability for me in various situations, even though I honestly would consider myself less autistic than I was, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. So I've really worked with things that I find challenging and want to work with. So that's another sort of thing. I have a sort of I don't know, kind of a mixed view of neurodiversity and the experience of it. I really think it's important to affirm the positive sides of things. And a lot of times that's really like, I think the most important things in our lives. And I don't see it really supported nearly enough in a lot of our society. And it's sometimes supported if it generally falls within fairly narrow bands of function in most of external society, and families vary tremendously on it. My family was very supportive with me as I grew up, but I really struggled through education and stuff. And so my interests as a kid largely were technical, scientific. I've always followed and developed that kind of interest. And building a career out of that has been really surprisingly challenging in some ways and unsurprisingly challenging in others. As a, I had trouble with math due to basically dyslexia. And so I was never, the last I was in public schooling was 9th grade, and I maybe got C's in like algebra or something because of that. It was a very miserable, kind of traumatizing experience that the accommodations really weren't made. We knew that, we fought for things to be done, and there was really also no good systems available to approach that, and to say, hey, like do this or something with the school. So they would have had to do custom stuff. I homeschooled after that, got into, but my choices of colleges were limited at that point. And I really homeschooled for environmental reasons when I did that. I went to Burlington College, got a degree in psychology and consciousness studies. My primary goal with that was to become a consciousness researcher. That's not the simplest field to be involved with because it's not heavily funded. And it's a small field of research at this point. My secondary purpose with it was to, I also got a degree in psychology there. at the same time with it, and put my focus into stuff related to the autism spectrum. So all the kind of papers and stuff I did that were not on consciousness were on autism spectrum stuff. I sometimes use friends as case studies with their permission. I got to know people in the autism community in Burlington at the time. So that was all kind of eye-opening in its own way. So there's no real education on autism in most programs, even still. I think there's maybe a little more now often, but all of mine was stuff I chose and made pretty much. And that, so it was really interesting. So like following this idea, do you mind if I take a couple more minutes? So following this idea of interest in things, I looked at, I realized that consciousness research wasn't what I immediately wanted to go into for practical reasons. And I decided to get into autism research. I thought, well, you know, I did pretty well in my psych program. I had good evals. There were research-based doctoral programs that would at least pay your way through them. I've never been a fan of like student loans just because I think with a disability, it's a really dangerous sort of scenario to get into. I applied to a number of programs in the end that were psych degrees related to it. Didn't get into any of them. And so then I went through what my backup plans were because I didn't really want to wait forever. So I applied to, and the deadlines for those were later, the ones that I found. I applied to a speech pathology program and a social work program, among other things, both at WVU. And I figured if they were going to be free, at least they would be inexpensive that way. And so I ended up becoming a social worker. I figured I'd have to wait longer to do anything else. Like wait like at least a year to even reapply to anything, and I might or might not get in if I did that. If I did social work program, it'd be 2 years and I'd have a master's degree and I could always go back to it if I wanted to. And I could try to get research experience. So that was one of the sort of criteria that I was missing. So I won't belabor my social work degree, but I got it. I worked for, I did my internships and autism related things for better and worse with that, I would say. I wasn't really an amazing fan of some of the training and experience I got. But on the other hand, it did have the effect of paying for most of my social work degree, and I had a lot of time to do self-study. So, you know, this is giving maybe a little bit of feel of the complexity of the process of some of this kind of stuff. After that, I ended up doing various things. I started doing psychotherapy in West Virginia. Did it for a bit, got a little bit burnt out with it. Had some negative experiences when I did some advocacy with people in the community with various institutions in the area, and that didn't really like what I had to say. I kind of just, I ended up going to, applying to a university program again, and starting another PhD program. That was really bad experience. I got really good education for a year, but really couldn't complete some of the work in it. the people in that particular program really didn't listen very well to the things that I said that I needed to make sure that I would be able to get through the program. And lo and behold, I couldn't. And some of the things that happened were really a surprise to me. So in previous situations I'd been in, the education was kind of maybe a little bit below my level to accommodate like my history. In this situation, it was at my level, but really challenging in its demands. So that was probably my worst employment experience as well. I really learned a lot about negative employment experiences from that context. The particular institution is not very good as an employer from my point of view. Very rigid. I mean, they're okay if you're like very typical, but otherwise not so much. And then I ended up doing psychotherapy, and that's been challenging in its own rights as well. I'm still really adapting the work that I do to work for my like neurological needs and my physical needs in the situation. I feel like I'm a very effective psychotherapist, but it also has been demanding too. So I guess I'll leave that as an introduction. And you're quiet.
Thank you for sharing all of that. I mean, I think that so many people have been through such traumatic experiences of invalidating experiences. And I'm curious, and I'll open this up not just to the panelists, but for anyone. What advice would you have for anyone who's just beginning the process of like, maybe my current employment is not really meeting my needs?
You're what? You missed a word.
Well, my current employment is not meeting my needs. Like what's something that anyone knows now about this process of finding that goodness of fit? What's something you know now that you wish you knew a long time ago? Rebecca.
Yeah, I would just, kind of move on if you can. It gets, physical symptoms get really challenging. I feel like sometimes it can take the body a long time to heal. And it's if there's any possibility of having an alternative.
I think we lost oh, I think we're good. Yeah, and I think that one thing that is really important is to sort of recognize signs of stress in yourself. I think so many people from living a lifetime of chronic stress have so much brain-body disconnect. So some people feeling so fatigued, like physically, cognitively fatigued, is a sign of the environment not being a good fit, including employment. More physical pain, more headaches, intestinal symptoms. Like this is how the body presents dysregulation. And so, I think that if we saw someone like flipping their lid and like throwing things, we would recognize dysregulation. But dysregulation presents in so many ways, and we've got lots of brain clubs about that from the winter. And physical pain and fatigue are like common presentations of nervous system dysregulation. It's a comment in the chat. I feel like I've spent so many years tuning my body to stress out. Absolutely, especially when you're in a culture that's like, suck it up, power through, pain is gain. Or, in my field, in my training, it's very much like, your needs don't matter. because it's, if you were a good doctor, that means that it doesn't matter how you feel. And you're like, oh, I guess that's how that is. But you're like, no, that's a brain rule, not a world rule. In order to take care of other people, you have to be well yourself. It's destructive. Absolutely. Another comment in the chat: chronic fatigue is something I was definitely dealing with as I was preparing to leave my prior employer. Absolutely. Chronic fatigue is often, an inflammatory process, an autoimmune process. Yeah. So ironic. Yeah.
I'll throw something out here. I think thing one often for people, like if you're like in employment or looking for it, but especially if you're in it already, it's social capital matters. And really, when you get down to brass tacks of whether people are likely to accommodate you or not, it's, how valuable are you perceived in your environment? And are you perceived as someone who's worth accommodating? And that's not how it's supposed to work, but it's in a lot of situations, it has how it does work in different subcultures and different regional cultures and different fields, all have different sort of like traditions with that and mores. And as you get to a point, especially of changing fields, it can be really awkward because it can be really difficult to know what to expect. So like, for example, with the aspect of subculture, in clinical educational programs, I've generally found that clinicians have a lot more respect for disability issues that I've experienced, at least in psychology. In research, the attitude really was very different. So often you get an idea of like this sort of empirical version of fairness, that like things should like mathematically add up the same between different people, and stuff like that starts to get in the way of people actually looking at you individually, partly because their jobs are totally oriented often towards not looking at people individually. So that's their mindset. And they don't have the experience of really helping people navigate difficulties. So that's just like an example of a difference. But like, if I'm in a place where part of my skills and stuff are grossly beyond what's required by the employment, it's a very different social status than where I'm like, my best things are sort of average and that really matter in the situation, and my worst things are below their average, and it's like, well, okay, kind of like, are you really sure you want to be here? And so it's there's different ball games with it, and it's really hard if you're also in situations where like how much money you make matters, and you're potentially new to things. There's less flexibility sometimes about what jobs you can take and stuff. So those are all pieces of it too.
Thank you. We got about 10 minutes, so I'd love to open up the floor to questions or comments or stories or anything from the whole audience.
Thanks, everyone, so much for sharing what's going on. Rebecca, it was super helpful to hear what you had to say, because I left emergency medicine like 12 years ago and became a freelance writer and took on more and more and more work until I too was sitting at a desk for 40 plus hours a week at a computer. And I always just felt like a spoiled, like ungrateful, like I don't know what, for hating it and not wanting to do assignments that I didn't find interesting. And so, at some level you do sort of think maybe your body's breaking down, but then you just start scolding yourself. No, you're fine. You just have to have the right attitude. And I guess it's all ableism, but it's just revelatory, Rebecca, to hear your story, and Megan, to hear your comments. And and the other speakers to just kind of weighing in on this. It's so validating.
Right. I think all too often, as individuals, we might think that we're the only ones who like can't do the thing, but really this is a systemic marginalization of a large group of people. 1 in 5 people learns, thinks, and communicates differently than the so-called typical brain, although I'm not sure that there like is a typical brain, but like the brain that's been like regarded by this society as the most productive, the most like that earns the most money, like it's the like capitalist, ableist machine. Yeah, Rebecca.
Yeah, I just want to say too, it was interesting because I was at my latest job for 7 years and I didn't even really figure out that it was a factor in my symptoms, even though they started when I started the job. I just sort of thought that was a coincidence. And yeah, and also, you know, I did a lot of healthcare during that time and nobody really figured it out until I came to Melissa, I have to say. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you for saying that, but you figured it out yourself. I mean, I think that, and it's like you, all people have to be in a safe environment and be regulated enough to reduce that brain body disconnect, where you can be like, your cortex can turn back on and be like, oh, this is not working. But when you're like in it, you can't, you're just trying to survive. You're just like paddling. Tracy.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think community is really important. Like talking about these things, it brings to light that you're not by yourself. You're not the only person that thinks this way. You're not wrong for thinking that way or needing, you know, a different sort of accommodation. And the more that we talk about it, the more normalized it becomes. So more jobs that you reach out to, Jenny, right? When you say you're autistic, they just go, okay, that's cool. Thanks for sharing. Like that will be really, really, really nice. And I think that people they'll start to appreciate how neurodivergent folks think. Like I've had many clients ask for an accommodation and then the employer be like, that actually works better for a lot of people or all the people. That's more efficient. Why are we doing it this way? So it's good to share and we shouldn't be ashamed. And we have a lot to learn from each other in that sense too. So thank you, Mel, for All Brains Blanc community, although it's a ton of work.
Well, no, but I mean, you're so welcome. But I mean, it's really about like, I also think that, you know, we can come together and support one another in shifting the community culture, and we have the opportunity for like this next generation to not have to unlearn stuff if they just learn it the right way, which is that there is no right way. Like, I mean, can you even imagine if like little kids actually learned in preschool that there's no right way to think, learn, and communicate? Then it's like the only thing they've ever learned, right? And in the chat, the amount of suffering this would prevent, absolutely. Because, you know, in 2022, I have 6-year-old patients who are already getting the message that they are broken and defective and they're not doing the thing. And so anyway, and that's honestly just like by my own story in the setting of autistic burnout, of having an employment situation that was not working for my brain. I was also envisioning, like, I had a then 3-year-old and I really wanted her to grow up in a completely different culture, where like we've been talking about brains since she's 2, and she knows she's autistic. She's proud of her brain. She walks around, she's just like, I have a kind of brain that needs vestibular input right now. Like, she's amazing. And like, it's just, yeah, shout out to Luna for being incredible. Absolutely. And like all the little kids, even typically developing kids who I'm just like, did you know that we all have different brains. And they're like, oh, sweet. And like even a typically developing kid who's like, picks up a toy and like does a thing with it. I'm like, oh, that's so interesting that your brain did that with it. My brain did this with it. And like little Johnny this morning, not little Johnny because of HIPAA, but like, you know, somebody else did something else with it. Like we all have different brains. And they're like, oh, cool. So that's how it could be. But like inclusion has to start with at preschool. Oh, thank you, Andrew. Thank you for coming. So anyway, with that, I thank all of you for coming, being here, and being part of this process in building this community. And I think that, I mean, like my experience thus far is that when any conversation I'm having, you know, with any community partner or like any people are like, oh, yeah, I never thought about it like that way. Yeah, there really is no one right way to be a person, because that's how I say it. So like, yeah, I know, right. So anyway, I think that I think that we have so much to be optimistic about. And speaking of which, next week at Brain Club, it's youth self-advocacy, and we're gonna have some teenagers talking about the process of learning to show up as their true selves. So if you have time and space to come support these young people showing up in the world, please do. And other things to tell you about, this Saturday morning, the All Brains Belong team is going to be at the State House lawn in Montpelier for the Climb Out of Darkness event. And if you're located somewhere far away or just it's more accessible to, we wanted to have two pathways. So we have a virtual track. It's 10 to 12 at the State House lawn, and then we have our virtual track at 10:30. And at 10:45, I'm going to give a talk on the State House lawn that Orca Media is going to live stream, so that it's like actually both tracks are having the equivalent experience, because that's what I think should be. Like, it shouldn't be like that the default is in person and the virtual is like if you can't do the default. So anyway, so yes, so the talk will be recorded at 10:45. Yes. And it's all about the myths of parenthood, which is like a context for there's no right way to be a person. So amazing. Well, thank you all so much for coming, and thank you to Rebecca and Michael and Tracy, and I hope you all have a nice night. Bye.